The Squire from the Dragonlands. The river's flow coiled up and down the countryside like a snake through grass. A myriad of towns were scattered along its length, each with water wheels siphoning its power. Past the towns, away from the things of man, creatures and critters of all sort came down to drink from the river's cool water. Atop a hill overlooking a bank on this very river crouched Sir Alphonse, the knight with one arm. Beside him was his latest squire, a young boy named Baldwin.
"Can we go slay it already?"
Alphonse took a deep breath.
"Let me try and explain this one more time. The river drake is hiding under the mud on the edge of the river down there. We're leagues away from any human being. If that crazy wandering bard hadn't told us about it, we'd have never known it was here." "Well, now that we know, let's go down and slay the beast."
"We will, eventually. But what I'm getting at is that this matter isn't urgent. If no people are in danger, then we've got the advantage of time. We can wait until nightfall when the creature will be sluggish and much easier to kill."
"There's no honor in killing a sleeping beast."
"Look, kid, this isn't a duel. There's no such thing as honor when you're fighting dragon spawn. They'll rip you to shreds if you make a single mistake. So if we've got to wait hours to gain just one edge, then that's what we're going to do."
"But all great heroes of the stories fight in the light of day. We're not some horse thieves. We're knights."
The boy rose to shake a righteous fist at the heavens. "Firstly, sit down and shut up. You keep yelling like that and it'll hear us. Secondly, you're not a knight. I am. You're a squire, which means you do whatever your knight tells you. And thirdly, the great heroes of the stories have a habit of all dying in spectacular fashion. And as long as you're my problem, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen to you." Baldwin frowned, and only at Alphonse's insistent glare did he actually sit down. The boy grumbled, fiddling with the straps of his armor. He was wrapped in ornately patterned plate armor, over which was a tabard emblazoned with his family crest. The oversized longsword at his belt had a gilded hilt with the head of a lion for its pommel. Most squires did not have such things, but Baldwin happened to be the firstborn son of a rich noble. Alphonse did have on plate of his own, but he knew better than to waste money on plumage. It didn't matter how good you looked if you were dead. What mattered was if you had the right tools for the job. Down below, the water began to stir. A four-legged creature crawled out onto the bank, water and mud dripping off its body. After a moment of rolling on the grass, the river drake's dark blue scales became visible.
"There it is,"
Baldwin said with wonder.
"It probably came up to sun itself, or it's hungry and about to go hunting. Either way, it's going to be alert, so we don't want to—"
"For glory!" Baldwin bellowed, ripping his sword free and charging down the hill. Alphonse pinched the bridge of his nose, wishing he could say that he was surprised. For a split fraction of an instant, he considered just sitting back and watching the idiot get mauled to death. But that wouldn't be very knightly of him, so Alphonse got up and chased after the fool. The drake had noticed them by this point, and was baring its teeth in welcome. Letting out a battle cry, Baldwin swung his gilded sword down at the creature's head. And of course, the blade bounced off its thick scales. The drake was an adolescent, about 3 times the length of a man from snout to the end of its tail. Its scales would be too thick, especially at the head, for a sword blade to pierce. Maybe at the joints, or with the power of a horse's charge behind the swing. But Alphonse hadn't been about to bring any horses near the death trap of a river. Its belly would be softer if the drake could somehow be flipped over, but that was easier said than done. The boy really should have brought an axe, like Alphonse had told him. As it was, Baldwin stared at his useless sword with shock as the drake latched onto his leg. The boy let out a panicked cry as he was dragged to the muddy ground. The drake then went for his neck, but Baldwin had just enough sense to block its teeth with his forearm. The vambrace that protected his arm began to bend under the power of the drake's jaw. Even plate wouldn't protect the boy for long. Baldwin started crying out for help as he hacked ineffectually at the drake's face. Alphonse didn't bother drawing his sword. Instead, he pulled his warhammer from the metal ring where it hung on his belt. Both the narrow blunt side and the sharp pick end would be better suited towards cracking through the drake's scales.
"I will not perish here,
monster! Baldrin said as he tried to stab the creature in the eye, but the blade's length made that impossible from his position. Alphonse swung his hammer at the drake's ribs. He felt a satisfying crack, and the creature growled in pain. The drake pulled back into the water, dragging the squire with him. That wasn't good. If it took Baldrin down the river, he would likely never be seen again. And it wasn't as though Alphonse could drag the creature back to shore, not even if he'd had both arms. So Alphonse found himself chasing the creature into the water. Oh, no you don't. I can't afford to lose another one. Another? The boy managed to get out. I'm joking, of course. Just an old night jest, Alphonse said, throwing himself onto the drake's back. He buried the pick end of the hammer into the dragon spawn's side. It hissed through its teeth, but kept moving deeper into the stream. But if we survive this, I'll definitely consider killing you myself. And with that, the river's current took hold of the three of them. Sir Alphonse, still covered in mud and drake blood, staggered up to the door of the Nighthold in Newford. Nightholds like this one were scattered across every nation in the jurisdiction of the Errant Order, and most, this one included, consisted of a tall watchtower with a much wider building around its base. It was just a step short of a castle. His single hand was occupied, so rather than knock, he kicked a steel-shod foot against the heavy wooden door. After a brief pause, a bulky man-at-arms pulled the door open and nodded to Alphonse. Alphonse nodded back before stepping inside. The room within was rectangular, with doors along its walls leading deeper into the hold. Directly across from the door was a man sitting behind a desk. He was middling in years and had a full beard to show for it, which was just starting to take on some gray. He was solidly built, with a stoic expression and eyes that were slightly larger than the rest of his face. It gave him a vaguely owl-like appearance. The man wore no armor, but his sheathed sword was propped against the side of the desk. From his neck dangled the Errant's pendant, a circle of metal stamped with the image of a sword being thrust down through a writhing dragon. An identical one hung from Alphonse's own neck beneath his armor. Alphonse walked over to the desk and dropped the severed head of the river drake onto it. Green blood leaked out over the table. The man at the desk calmly shifted his papers away from the pooling liquid. Sir Alphonse, always a pleasure. Likewise, Sir Arthur. I take it your hunt went well? My hunt was successful. It did not go well. First, the thick-skulled oaf charged down the hill and immediately got himself caught in the drake's jaws. Then it starts pulling down into the river, so I hop on its back and we both go for a ride. So there I am, sliding down the river, clinging to my hammer, lodged in the cursed thing's back. Meanwhile, the drake's still trying to eat my squire, so I yell at him to just drop the sword and draw his dagger. But he doesn't want to lose the bloody thing because it's a family heirloom. So finally, after at least an hour of this, we got to shallower waters, and by that point the creature was starting to get tired out. I pulled off its back and dazed it by bashing in the head a couple times. Then the two of us managed to drag it onto the shore and wail at it until it stopped struggling. And the boy? Well, after getting his arm dressed, I sent him back home. I can't work with a reckless idiot like that. This makes, what, the 5th squire you've dropped in as many months? Well, it's hardly my fault. They're all either cowards, fools, or just plain incompetent. I swear, these boys take a few dueling lessons and think they're ready to become an errant. Maybe if you spent a little more time training them before you got rid of them. I don't mind inexperience, that's to be expected. But these kids don't even have a foundation to build upon. Their instincts are completely wrong. I could never trust any of them in a real battle. Arthroy sighed. Well, I think you may have been a little premature in getting rid of that last one. A new mission already? Indeed, at a town called Leafall, about a half a day's ride from here. A farmer and a few animals have gone missing. Multiple people claim to have seen a giant snake with more than one head. So I'm to hunt a Ladon, then. It would seem that way. Well, that's bloody wonderful. And I just fired my squire. Not that I trust that boy to help me hunt a Ladon anyway. That's a two-man job at least, you know. I'm aware. Arthroy nodded. What about you? Why don't you get out of that chair for once, armor up, and help me out? I'm afraid I'm meeting some noblemen for dinner this evening. Trade deals and all that, I'm sure you'll understand.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'm up to my waist in scales and venom. You're going to be fine dining with rich folk. It's not all bad news. I've got a few unassigned squires in the barracks at the moment. They were supposed to move on to headquarters tomorrow, but if you wanted to grab one of them first... Have any of them ever hunted dragonspawn before? No. Have any of them ever served on a real battlefield before? No. Have any of them ever been in a real fight? And no, duels do not count. No. Then I cannot, as a man swearing chivalrous oaths, bring any of them to certain death hunting a Ladon.
Offroy shook his head. I suppose you'll have to wait then, and hope the Ladon doesn't eat anyone else in the meantime. It was then that an idea occurred to Alphonse. A terrible idea, but a fascinating one. This night hold has holding cells, does it not? Yes. Are there any occupants in said cells? A few. Concern was growing on Offroy's face. Good. I'd like you to show me. You can't be suggesting that I take a criminal on the hunt? I'm toying with the idea. What's the harm?
The harm is that you might set free a dangerous criminal.
What's worse? That some criminal goes free, or a dragonspawn goes killing for another day?
Alphonse.
Oh, come on. Humor a crippled knight without a squire. Offroy let out a groan, but stood up, taking his sword as he did.
Fine, I will show you the men we have locked up, if only to prove to you what a stupid idea it is.
That's the spirit. He looked pointedly at Alphonse with those large eyes of his. Do not turn this into a mess I'm going to have to clean up. Why, Offroy, my good man, when have I ever made a mess? He laughed at that. Alphonse, you should have been a jester. If I had been, I'd still have both arms. Although I would not be half as good at guilting people into favors. With that, Offroy pulled open the door. The room inside was stark, made primarily of dark stone. It was large and divided in two by a row of bars. A guard sitting near the door made as if to rise, but Offroy waved him back down. On the other side of the bars, 3 men got up to approach the front of the cell. A 4th man, lying in the shadowy corner, didn't bother to move. Sleeping, it seemed. Here are your candidates, Offroy said, the last word with more than a hint of disdain. There was a spindly man with incredibly pale skin, a hefty balding man whose smile was missing some teeth, and finally a short stocky man who looked like he was sizing Alphonse up for every coin he owned. Let me guess. Poacher, tavern brawler, cutpurse. Close, Offroy said. 2 out of 3.
Grave robber, actually,
the spindly man clarified.
Damn,
was hoping for a poacher. You looked hungry enough to risk hunting on royal grounds.
Hungry enough, yes, but I've not the skill for it. Besides, you'd be surprised how many folks get married with full pockets.
Fascinating, but of no use to me. How about you, big fellow? You're good with your fists, I take it? You could say that, Offroy said. You got in a scuffle with another regular at the tavern in town. Ended up killing the man. Snapped his neck.
Not on purpose,
the bulky man said, looking bashful.
I just sort of lose my head when I get to fighting.
Tell it to the magistrate. You get into a blood rage? Alphonse asked.
I guess you could call it that.
Then also of no use to me. I need someone with a level head. He turned to the final man. The thief, I presume.
You presume correct, Sir Knight.
The short man gave a dramatic bow. Now, I must admit, you being caught doesn't really say much for your abilities.
Not at all, sir. I was only caught after trying to sell the stolen goods. I've never been caught in the act before.
Ah, so deft and covert. Tell me, have you any skill with a weapon?
Not unless you count the small knife I used to cut purses.
I might be able to work with that. How quick are you on your feet?
Quick enough.
All right. Then I have one last question for you. How do you feel about dragon spawn? The man blinked, then shifted with discomfort. Finally, he shot a paranoid glance over his shoulder.
What's wrong? Does the word dragon spawn trouble you?
Don't say that out loud, the man hissed. Or they'll be summoned. Alphonse shook his head, clicking his tongue.
I'm afraid that particular detail is simply not true, but I can see I've not convinced you. Fear is not so easily uprooted, and with that, I must discount you as an option. I will not have another companion running away right as I need him.
There, you see how futile this was? Offroy said. Not quite. We still have one man left. Alphonse looked past the first three men, to the one lying in the shadows. Oh no, not that one. I could not let you take him under any circumstances. And why is that? Offroy opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated. Why don't you ask him, and find out?
Alphonse shrugged, and leaned in, between the bars of the cell.
You there in the back! Come on, get up. I know you aren't really asleep. I saw you twitch at the word dragon spawn. Which was true, though it had only been the slightest shift of position. Alphonse easily could have imagined it.
Whatever game you're playing, Shiner, I am not interested.
Alphonse stood back as if the voice had physically struck him. There were two things that made it so peculiar. The first was the word Shiner. It was a derogatory term for knights, but not one often used in these parts. The second, and far more interesting, was the accent. Step into the light, Alphonse ordered. The man did not reply. Get up and come where he can see you if you want to eat for the next 3 days, Offroy said with a sneer. The man did not flinch. He did not jolt or scramble to his feet. Instead, he slowly rolled over, got up at his leisure, and took 3 steps forward, where the light would catch him just a little better. Now do you see? Alphonse did see. The boy was perhaps 17, maybe younger. His age was hardly the most remarkable thing about him. As the boy had walked forward, the other men in the cell had taken noticeable steps away, which at first glance would have been strange. The boy had some muscle on him, but was mostly of a leaner build, certainly not the bulk of the tavern brawler. He wasn't even as tall as the grave robber, and only beat the cutpurse by a head. He carried no weapon, and made no threatening gestures. But he walked with a careful, measured stride, and his dark eyes studied the room with a relaxed intensity that absorbed every detail. That might have gone unnoticed by others, not by Alphonse. He recognized them as traits of a warrior. The boy had seen battle, death. But even these traits were not what had been most peculiar about the boy. The boy's skin was a dark olive. His hair was straight, nearly reaching his shoulders, and as dark as his eyes. There were other features, subtler, like the bridge of his nose, the fullness of his eyebrows, the sharpness of the chin. They were not Western features. That, along with the accent, made the boy's origin quite clear. He's a Dragonlander, Offroy stated. I can see that, Alphonse replied, not breaking eye contact with the boy. His stare was as piercing as any blade. They found him collapsed on the King's Highway, half-starved and covered in week's old guts. Small miracle he didn't expire from the blood loss or wound rot. Luck of the dragon. That's it. You just scooped him up off the ground and dropped him in here? Offroy chuckled. Hardly. Even in the state he was in, he broke Sir Gamel's arm and nearly opened the throat of one of his men-at-arms. It took 3 of them just to hold him down and finally tie him up. Even then, he almost escaped twice on the trip here. The boy cracked a smile at the recounting. You can tell that Shiner. I'm ready for a rematch, if he doesn't want to hide behind all his men this time. And what crime is he being charged with, aside from acting under delirium and embarrassing Sir Gamel? Alphonse asked. Offroy looked at Alphonse as if he'd asked what color dirt was. He is Dragonsworn, obviously. Just about everyone east of the Serpent Strait is these days. But in case you needed more proof, we found lots of incriminating evidence on him. Dozens of weapons, a plethora of knives,
a couple of axes, a mace, and a spear. Far more tools of violence than any honest man would need this far from a battlefield. Some of them were even made from the bones of dragon spawn. We also found several vials of venom and urine, probably used for some kind of demented ritual. But most damning of all, he had this hanging from his neck. Offroy pulled a small object out of the pouch and showed it to Alphonse. A drake tooth tied to a strip of leather. If that doesn't say servant of the dragon, I don't know what does. Alphonse took the tooth, massaging his chin thoughtfully. What say you, boy? Are you guilty of serving the dragon? The boy didn't reply. Rather, he seemed to stare past Alphonse, as if the knight weren't worthy of his attention. Offroy shook his head. You see, even he does not defend himself. We're still waiting on word from headquarters as to what to do with him. Either life in shackles or execution, as is fitting for any man that swears to serve the dragon's dark allegiance. Alphonse sighed. Offroy, my good man, you are knowledgeable in many areas, but the Dragonlands is not one of them. Excuse me? And you, boy. I thought one of the Cottle Thaben would at least speak up to defend his own honor. The boy blinked, and for the first time since Alphonse had laid eyes on him, he actually looked uneasy. What did you just say? The boy asked, as if not trusting his own ears. I said Cottle Thaben. You are one of them, are you not? Cot what? Offroy struggled with the word. What are you talking about, Alphonse? The boy could only stare at Alphonse. This boy is no dragon sworn. He's one of the nomadic tribesmen of the east known as the Cottle Thaben. Alphonse allowed a small smile. In their tongue it means snake killer. They hunt dragon spawn. And how could you possibly know this boy is one of these men you speak of? Well, your supposed evidence against him was sufficient. The weapons speak for themselves. They are weapons of the hunt. Steel isn't always available for nomadic tribes, so sometimes they make do with bone. The vials are also tools for hunting. The urine is likely a lure to draw out certain species of dragon spawn, and not all kinds of dragon spawn are immune to the venom of others, so they too can be tools used against the scaled ones. But the tooth is what made me certain of his identity. All men of the Cottle Thaben wear one. But I've never heard of one of these Cottle Thaban. The boy spoke up. We rarely dealt with Westerners, and there were never many of us. Now there is only one. His gaze shifted to the floor. You are the last one? As far as I am aware. Alphonse cursed under his breath. I didn't know it had gotten so bad over there. The boy scowled. And how would you? You sit here in these soft lands, safe from harm. For 1,000 years you rapped of my people's efforts to hold back the hordes of the dragon. Then every few centuries you get on your horses, ride in on your great hunts, kill a few dragon spawn, murder some locals, and call yourselves heroes. And what about you? You say your people are dead. Well, is it not the way of the Cottle Thaben to swear vengeance on the man or creature that slays kin? So what are you doing here in these soft lands? Bleeding out in the dirt? The boy's eyes blazed. Do not speak of my people's ways, Shiner. Alphonse grinned. Or what? The boy looked him up and down. Or we'll get to see what a knight with no arms looks like. Alphonse stared at him for a count of 5. Then he let out a hearty laugh. What's your name, kid? Kazim, the boy said with defiant eyes. It's nice to meet you, Kazim. He turned to Offroy. Let him go. What? Let him go, Alphonse repeated. He's done nothing wrong. Sir Alphonse, even if I believed you about this Thaben, he tried out the name with limited success. I wouldn't just let him go. He assaulted a knight and his men. He was delirious. Sir Gamel does not see it that way. If Sir Gamel spent less time strutting about on his horse, chasing after fair maidens, and more time training to use his hands and weapons, then he might have actually been able to defend himself when the half-starved, bleeding-out kid took a swing at him.
I'm sorry, but it's out of the question. He will have to stand for his scraps. If you'd like to defend the boy on his charge of being Dragonsworn, then you may. But there's no way I'm going to just set him free after he attacked the knight.
Alphonse ran a finger up and down the hilt of his sword, thoughtful. I'm sure there's some way.
I don't need your help, Shiner.
The boy spat. Alphonse smiled in reply, hand tightening on the hilt. What about trial by combat?
You can't be serious.
Trial by combat? Kazim inquired. In this country, when one man stands accused of a crime by another, he may opt to settle the matter through martial skill.
Only if Gamel agrees,
Offroy pointed out. But he's not here, is he?
No. He's currently headed back to the capital, nursing a broken arm.
Yes, and since he is clearly incapable of combat at this time and place, another can fight in his stead, like a fellow knight such as myself.
That would be irregular.
But not illegal.
It's a technicality.
Wait, Kazim broke in. You're saying that if I beat this one-armed Shiner, I go free?
That is what he is suggesting.
And if I lose, I die? Nothing so barbaric, Alphonse said. You'll just have to swear fealty to me.
Fealty? An oath of loyalty. Until death or he releases you. So what? I'd be your servant?
Something along those lines?
Very well. It doesn't matter.
I don't plan on losing.
I accept your challenge, Shiner.
It's settled then.
Offroy?
The other knight groaned.
Alphonse?
What? You can't tell me you don't want to see what he can do. Offroy hesitated, then shifted, and finally sighed and motioned for the guard to open the cell.
If he kills you, well, I guess you'll be out of my hair forever. So maybe in that scenario, I should just thank him.